The autumn light in Savannah is the kind that makes everything look like it's been dipped in honey. It comes through the kitchen window at a low angle this time of year, catching the dust motes and turning them gold. I notice things like that now. I didn't used to. When you spend 30 years making other people's beds and folding other people's towels, you stop seeing beauty in small things. You stop seeing much of anything. But this morning, standing at my counter with my coffee, my good mug, the one without a single chip in it, the one I bought myself just because I wanted something whole, I let the light stay on my face for a long moment before I think about anything else. Some mornings, that's enough. Just the light. Just the quiet. But some mornings, memory finds you before the coffee does. I'm pulled back 4 years. The way you get pulled back sometimes. Not gently, but all at once. Like stepping off a curb you didn't see. I'm standing in my daughter's kitchen in Atlanta, holding a pan of sweet potato casserole I had started the night before. The kind with the brown sugar crust and the pecans pressed in by hand. One at a time. Because that's how my mother taught me. I had driven 2.5 hours in the rain because my daughter had said, "Come for Sunday dinner." "Mom, we miss you." I should have known something was wrong by the way she opened the door. Not wide. Just enough. My son-in-law was already at the dining table, his phone flat in front of him, like a place setting. He glanced up when I came in and gave me the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes. My daughter took the pan from my hands, set it on the counter without looking at it, and said, "We actually ordered Thai food." "Mom, I forgot to tell you." I said, "That's fine." "Of course. No worries," my son-in-law said, without looking up from his phone. "You can leave the casserole, though. The cleaning lady can take it home." My daughter didn't say anything. She moved to the refrigerator and started rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. And I stood there in my rain-damp coat with nowhere to put my hands. Understanding, for the first time, exactly what I was in that house. Not a guest. Not a mother. A detail. Something to be managed. I ate Thai food off their good plates that night and smiled when I was supposed to and drove home in the dark, 2.5 hours back to my apartment with the radiator that knocked every night at 2 in the morning like it had unfinished business. I didn't cry. I made a decision instead. People ask me sometimes when things started to change. They expect me to name a big moment. A windfall. A lottery ticket. A rich uncle nobody knew about. But the truth is ordinary and a little stubborn. Which is, I think, exactly how real things grow. I had worked for the Beaumont family for 11 years. Private housekeeping. Full service. Mr. Beaumont was a retired federal judge. Widowed. Precise about everything from the way his shirts were folded to the temperature of his afternoon tea. His daughter had hired me after interviewing 6 other women. She had told me, without softening it, that her father was difficult, that 3 previous housekeepers had quit, and that she expected me to last 6 months at most. I lasted 11 years. Judge Beaumont was not difficult. He was exacting, which is a different thing entirely. He wanted things done right. And once I understood his system, I did them right. We developed a rhythm. The way 2 people do when they share a space long enough and respect each other enough not to get in the way. He never called me by the wrong name. He never spoke to me like I was furniture. On my birthday every year. Without fail. There was a card on the kitchen counter in his handwriting. Not printed. Handwritten. In the evenings, when I'd finished and was gathering my things, he sometimes called from his study. Marlene, did you see the news today? And I'd stand in the doorway and we'd talk for 10 minutes about something happening in the world. Politics. A court ruling. A storm coming up the coast. He listened to what I said. Actually listened. When he died, I was the one who found him, sitting in his reading chair with his glasses still on, and a biography of Thurgood Marshall open across his knee. Peaceful. So entirely at peace that for a moment I just stood there and thought, that is exactly how he would have chosen it. I went to the funeral. His daughter, Renee, stood beside me at the reception afterward and held my hand for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "He talked about you more than he talked about most people." I hadn't known that. 3 weeks later, his attorney contacted me. The judge had left me something in his will. Not an enormous sum, but more than I had ever held in my hands at one time. More than a year's wages. Renee told me later that he had changed the will about 2 years before he died. After I had sat with him through a bad week, when the arthritis in his hands was so severe he couldn't open a jar or button his own shirt. And I had done both, without making him feel small about it. He never said thank you for that week. He didn't have to. The will said it instead. I put that money together with what I had saved. I had been saving in the way that women who can't afford not to save do it slowly. With intention. In the spaces between expenses. I kept a notebook. Every month, I wrote down what came in and what went out and what was left. I said no to things I wanted and yes to things I needed. I drove a car that embarrassed my daughter and wore shoes until the soles gave their honest opinion of the pavement. And then one Tuesday morning, I sat across from a real estate agent named Gloria, who had reading glasses on a beaded chain and a no-nonsense manner I respected immediately. And I told her what I was looking for. Something small. Something real. Something mine. She found me a house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Savannah. 20 minutes from where I had grown up. 2 bedrooms. A sun porch facing east. A kitchen with good light. And a backyard that had once been a proper garden and wanted to be one again. The bones were solid. The cosmetics were tired. But when I stood in the middle of that empty living room and felt the stillness of it, the particular silence of a house that's been waiting for someone to actually live in it, I knew. I signed the papers on a Wednesday. I cried in my car in the parking lot of the attorney's office. Not from sadness, but from something that didn't have a clean name. Relief. Maybe. Or the feeling of becoming. At 63 years old. Someone who could not be told to leave. The first thing I planted in the backyard was rosemary. My mother always said rosemary was for remembrance. I figured I had plenty worth remembering. And a few things worth growing back. My daughter found out about the house the way she found out about most things in my life, through a cousin who meant no harm. She called me on a Sunday evening, which was unusual. She typically texted, "Mom," she said, before I could even say hello properly. "Is it true you bought a house?" I told her it was. There was a pause that went on slightly too long. "Then why didn't you tell us?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I knew what you'd say. I thought, because I wanted one thing that was decided before you could weigh in on it. Because the word us was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and most of it wasn't about me. I said I had wanted to get settled first. That I'd have them down for a visit soon. She said that sounded wonderful. Her voice said something else entirely. They came 6 weeks after I moved in. My daughter and my son-in-law arrived on a Saturday morning, without much warning. I was in the backyard in my gardening gloves when I heard the car door. And by the time I came through the back gate, they were already standing on my front porch. Looking at the house, the way people look at property they're assessing rather than visiting. My son-in-law's eyes moved across the front of the house and landed on me with what I can only call a recalibration. I had never owned anything he couldn't summarize in a sentence before. This appeared to require two. Nice neighborhood, he said, smaller than I pictured. My daughter hugged me, in that quick way she had lately. More of a graze than a hold. She smelled like the expensive perfume she'd started wearing since he began making real money. She looked at the porch swing I had hung myself and tilted her head. "That's a lot of work for one person," she said. I told her I liked the work. Inside. They moved through the rooms in that way people do when they're trying to seem casual but aren't. My son-in-law opened the door to the sun porch. I looked at the reading chair and the small bookshelf I'd arranged there and said, "This would actually make a solid home office. Good light." I said it was my reading room. He nodded like I'd said something quaint. In the kitchen, my daughter ran her fingers along the countertop, the new countertop I had paid to have put in because the old one was cracked, and said, "You really did all this yourself." Her tone wasn't admiring. It was the tone of someone recounting a thing that didn't need to have happened. We had lunch. I had made cornbread and a pot of soup. My son-in-law ate with his phone beside his bowl. My daughter talked about their renovation plans. The new deck they were putting in. The kitchen backsplash she couldn't decide on. I asked questions. I was good at asking questions. I had spent a long time being the person in the room who asked and listened rather than talked. After lunch, my son-in-law pushed back from the table and said, "Marlene," he had never once in 12 years of marriage to my daughter called me Mom. "We've actually been doing some thinking about the future." Your future. I folded my hands in my lap. My daughter looked at the window. Not at me. At the window. He talked for a while. He talked about how living alone at my age presented challenges. About property maintenance and emergency response times, and the financial unpredictability of homeownership on a fixed income. He used phrases like long-term planning and quality of life, and the emotional burden on family members. At some point, my daughter began talking too. Her voice had that careful softness it got when she'd rehearsed something. She said they'd been looking into some communities' wonderful places. She said, "Really wonderful. Mom. Not like the old-fashioned kind. More like resorts, where I would have everything taken care of. Meals. Activities. People, my own age." My son-in-law reached into the bag he'd brought in from the car. I had wondered about that bag and produced a folder. Inside were brochures. The glossy kind. With photographs of silver-haired women doing yoga on sunlit patios and men in pressed shirts playing chess by a fountain. He spread them on my clean table like a hand of cards. "This one's 40 minutes from us," he said, tapping one. So visits would be easy. My daughter said the wait list wasn't too long. My son-in-law said, "And obviously the house would need to be sold to fund the placement. But what's left after fees? You'd have full access to." I looked at my cornbread on their plates. Half eaten. Both of them. And I thought about the night 4 years ago in the rain. Driving home with sweet potato casserole in the car because a cleaning lady might want it. I said I'd think about it. My son-in-law said, "Great. Don't wait too long. The good spots go fast." They left around 3. I stood at the window and watched his car until it turned the corner. Then I sat in my reading chair on the sun porch. The one with the good light. And I stayed very still for a long time. The next morning, I called Renee Beaumont. I had stayed in touch with her after the judge died. The way you do with people you've been through. Something important, alongside. She was a corporate attorney in Charlotte. Direct and thorough. And she had said once, At the reception, after her father's funeral. You ever need anything? Marlene. You call me? I had taken her at her word. I told her what had happened. All of it. The visit. The folder. The brochures. The bag he'd brought in, already packed with those materials, as though the conversation had only one possible outcome. I told her what he'd said about the house. About the fees. About my access to what was left. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Marlene, has your son-in-law ever asked to be added to any of your accounts? I thought back. 2 years prior, he had mentioned, casually over a phone call, that it might be smart to have a joint account for emergencies. I had said I'd look into it, and then hadn't. The way you don't do things, you know aren't right, even when you can't yet name why. I told Renee. She said, I'm going to refer you to a colleague of mine. His name is Conrad Webb. He specializes in elder law, and he's one of the best I know. Call him Monday. Tell him everything you told me. And Marlene, don't sign anything. Not a grocery list. If it's from them. I said I understood. She said, You've been taking care of other people your entire life. Let someone take care of this for you. Conrad Webb had an office on a tree-lined street downtown. The kind of building with high ceilings, and the particular hush of serious work being done quietly. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s. Trim. With the kind of focused attention that made you feel like the only case he had. He asked me to start from the beginning, and I did. And he didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What they've described is a fairly textbook approach to positioning a family member for financial guardianship. It typically starts with establishing a narrative of incapacity confusion, inability to manage finances, safety concerns, before petitioning a court for legal control. I felt something cold move through me that I didn't let reach my face. He said, Have they made any comments to other people about your mental state? Any suggestions? Even casual ones? That you've been forgetful or confused? I thought of my neighbor Dottie, who had mentioned in passing that my son-in-law had stopped by one afternoon when I wasn't home and asked her how I'd been, whether I seemed to be managing all right, whether I had any falls she knew of. I had thought it was concern. I told Conrad. He nodded once. Slowly, the way a doctor nods when a symptom confirms what they already suspected. Here is what we're going to do, he said. He walked me through it, step by step. A cognitive evaluation from a certified specialist, independent. Documented. Airtight. A new will. Constructed with the kind of precision that leaves no room for challenge. A power of attorney designating Renee, not family, as my agent, in the event I ever genuinely couldn't make decisions myself. And small digital recorders, the kind that look like ordinary household objects, placed in the kitchen, the living room, and the hallway near the front door. Let them come back, he said. People who believe they have the advantage tend to be generous with their words when they think no one is listening carefully. He looked at me with a steadiness I found calming. You have done nothing wrong, he said. You earned this house. You saved for it and sacrificed for it, and it is yours. Our job now is to make sure the record reflects that completely. I drove home feeling something I couldn't immediately name. Not peace. Exactly. More like the feeling of standing up straight after a long time, being asked to make yourself smaller. They came back on a Saturday 3 weeks later. My daughter called the Friday before to say they were passing through and would it be all right to stop in. And I said, of course. Come for lunch. And then I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down everything Conrad had told me to do. and checked each item twice. The recorder on the kitchen shelf looked like a ceramic jar I kept wooden spoons in. I had practiced turning it on without looking at it. The one in the living room looked like a small decorative clock. The one in the hallway looked like nothing at all, because it was tucked behind the frame of a photograph of my mother. My daughter brought flowers this time. Grocery store flowers. The kind in the plastic wrapping. But she'd taken the wrapping off and put them in her hand, like she'd chosen each stem herself. My son-in-law carried a tote bag again. I noticed it, but said nothing. We sat in the kitchen. I had made coffee and put out a plate of the shortbread cookies I'd ordered from a bakery 2 streets over. The expensive ones, because I decided that if this was the day things came to a head, I was going to have good cookies on the table. My son-in-law got to it faster this time. He said they'd been worried since their last visit. He said my daughter had mentioned that I'd seemed a little off during a recent phone call. Confused about some dates. My daughter looked at her coffee cup when he said this. I said, "Which dates?" He said. "You thought your electric bill was due the week before. It actually was." I said I had paid the bill 2 days early because I prefer to pay early. I have paid every bill I have ever had early. It has been my practice for 40 years. He shifted. He said safety was the bigger concern. That the yard was a fall risk. That the sun porch steps were uneven. He had, apparently, noticed a lot of structural concerns during his first visit. I said I'd had a contractor assess the property the previous month. Everything was up to code. My daughter reached over and put her hand on mine. "Mom," she said, and her voice was genuinely soft. Almost the voice of the girl she used to be. "Nobody is saying you can't manage. We're saying we want to help." My son-in-law opened the tote bag. The same folder. Thicker now. New tabs. More brochures. And beneath those, paper clipped together. What looked like legal documents. He said he had spoken with an attorney. He said the process was straightforward and was really just about ensuring I was protected. He said the word protected the way people say it when they mean controlled. He slid the papers toward me. There was a pen beside them. Already uncapped. I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen. I thought about the morning I had signed the deed to this house. The weight of those keys pressed into my palm. The whispered promise I had made to myself in the empty living room. I did not touch the pen. Instead, I said, I also spoke with an attorney. The kitchen went very still. From the drawer by the refrigerator, I took out the envelope Conrad had prepared. I opened it and laid the contents on the table, one document at a time. The way he had coached me. Deliberately. Without hurry. The cognitive evaluation first. Full and formal. Signed by the specialist. Dated. With the clinic's letterhead. No evidence of impairment. No indicators of confusion or reduced capacity. My son-in-law's eyes moved across the page, and a muscle in his jaw moved with them. The letter from Conrad next. Outlining what he had learned about my son-in-law's inquiry to another attorney. The specific questions asked about the process of assuming guardianship over a parent-in-law who owned property and did not have a current will. My daughter said, "That's not," she stopped. My son-in-law said, "Where did you?" I said. "I also want you to hear something." I took out my phone. Conrad had shown me how to pull the audio cleanly. I pressed play and set the phone on the table between the coffee cups and the flowers and the untouched shortbread. Their voices came out crisp and clear. My son-in-law's first, the main bedroom, is a good size. They could configure it differently when she's gone. Then my daughter. Quieter? You mean when she moves? Then him again, right? Yeah. Of course. My daughter put both hands flat on the table. She was not looking at me. The front door opened. I had given Conrad a key. He came in unhurried, in a dark jacket, carrying his own folder, and stood at the edge of the kitchen with the particular calm of someone who has done this many times before. He said my son-in-law's name. He said, "You are hereby formally on notice of intent to pursue legal action for attempted financial exploitation of a protected adult under Georgia statutes, as well as civil action for coordination of fraudulent guardianship proceedings." He set his folder on the counter. "A copy of everything is in there for your records." My son-in-law stood up. His chair scraped. My daughter said his name. Very low. He said this was insane. He said I didn't understand what I was doing. He said, "This is what happens when old women listen to the wrong people." I had been waiting, without knowing it, for a moment that required exactly the kind of stillness I had spent a lifetime learning. Standing at bedsides, driving home in the rain, pressing pecans into casserole one at a time. I looked at him and I said, very quietly, "I understand exactly what I am doing. I have understood it longer than you have. Conrad said they should leave now. They did. My son-in-law first. My daughter stopped at the door and turned back. And for a moment, her face looked the way it did when she was young and had done something she knew was wrong. That particular mixture of shame and the wish for someone to tell her it could still be made right. I wasn't ready to be that someone. Not that day. I said, "You know where I am." She nodded once and went. I sat back down at my kitchen table in the afternoon light. Conrad joined me, and we went over the next steps. The filings. The protective orders. The timeline. It was practical work, and I was grateful for the practicality of it. Afterward, he had a cup of coffee and one of the shortbread cookies and said, "You handled that with remarkable composure." I said I'd had practice being underestimated. He smiled. "I think they understand now that that's finished. The months since have had their own particular texture. Legal proceedings move slowly, but they move." My son-in-law agreed to terms that spared my daughter a great deal of public difficulty. Terms I accepted not out of forgiveness. Not yet. But because my goal was never his suffering. My goal was my house. My life. My say over both. Renee calls now and then. She asks how the garden is. I tell her about the rosemary, which has spread further than I planned, and the tomatoes, and the new row of black-eyed Susans along the south fence. She says her father would have loved to see it. I think he would have. My daughter texted me in late spring. Not a call. A text? She said she was sorry. She said it wasn't an excuse, but she had been scared of him saying no to her. And she had made choices that she knew were wrong. She said she hoped I was well. I read it 4 times. I wrote back, "I'm well. Thank you. I'll call you when I'm ready." I don't know when ready will be, but I know what it will feel like when it arrives. Because I know what my own instincts sound like now. I have been listening to them long enough. Word traveled, the way it does in communities of women of a certain age. Without social media. Without announcements. Just the old reliable network of phone calls in church and the woman at the pharmacy who knows everyone. Other women started finding their way to my front gate. One brought a bundt cake and stayed for 2 hours, telling me about her nephew who had taken over her checking account by convincing her he was helping. One came with her sister and didn't say much. Just sat at my kitchen table and drank tea and looked at my walls like she was trying to remember that houses could feel like this. I started keeping Conrad's number written on a card I gave to anyone who needed it. I started knowing the statutes, by section number. I started being the person in the room who said, "You are not confused. You are not overreacting. You are not obligated to give what you spent your life building to someone who never helped you build it." I will leave this house to a trust that supports women in transition, women who are starting over, or starting for the first time. At an age when the world would prefer they simply stop, Renee is helping me structure it properly. The judge would have had opinions about the language of the provisions. I like to think they would have been good ones. This morning, the light came in gold and low, the way it does in autumn. And I stood at the counter with my whole coffee mug, the one I bought because I wanted something without a crack in it. And I let the warmth stay on my face. I am 67 years old. I own a house in Savannah with rosemary in the garden, and a reading room that faces east and a kitchen where I make whatever I want, and no one has a comment about it. My back is straight. My name is on the deed. My mind is documented to be entirely my own. Some people would call this a small life. Let them call it that. From here, it looks exactly like everything